bread drips red. Not wine. Something darker. Vlad Dracula sits at a table draped in silk, surrounded by 20,000 dying men. The stakes rise from earth like a forest cultivated in hell. Women clutch infants who will never grow old. The impaled scream prayers to gods who seem to have abandoned this blood-soaked valley outside Targoviste. And at the center of this garden of agony, he dines, calmly, deliberately, as if the screaming were music composed for his pleasure. A servant approaches, trembling, carrying more bread. He tries not to look at the forest of bodies, tries not to hear the wet sounds of flesh tearing as victims slide slowly down the stakes, tries not to smell the copper thickness of blood mixing with June heat. Vlad gestures to the impaled thousands. "Do you find my table setting distasteful?" The servant cannot answer. His throat has closed with horror. Vlad smiles. It is not a human smile. "Then you may join them." This is June 14th, 62. Sultan Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, approaches with an army of 150,000 men. He has come to crush a rebellion, to punish a vassal who refused submission, who slaughtered 23,000 Turkish civilians in a winter campaign so brutal that Europe celebrated with masses of thanksgiving. But when Mehmed's army reaches the capital, they stop. The forest of impaled corpses stretches for 3 miles. Greek historian Leonikos Chalkokondyles recorded that even the Sultan, a man who had ordered executions of his own, who had besieged cities and put populations to the sword, stood paralyzed. According to Chalkokondyles, Mehmed declared it impossible to defeat a man who understood so completely how to govern through terror. The next day, the Ottoman army retreated. This moment reveals something essential about Vlad III Dracula. He was not a vampire. He did not drink blood or transform into creatures of the night. But what he actually did, what the historical record confirms beyond doubt, was in some ways more terrifying than any Gothic fiction. Tonight, we journey into the life of Walachia's most notorious prince. Not the romantic figure of vampire mythology, but the historical man who impaled tens of thousands, who dined among dying victims, who transformed brutality into art form and terror into statecraft. We explore the real locations where his reign unfolded. Poenari Castle, perched on a cliff, accessible only by climbing 1,480 stone steps, built by slaves who died in their construction. Targoviste, where he massacred nobility on Christianity's holiest day. The Danube borderlands where his armies conducted ethnic cleansing. The forests where he launched midnight raids that nearly killed a sultan. This is not legend embellished across centuries. This is documented history, recorded by German chroniclers who printed his atrocities on Gutenberg presses, by Greek historians who interviewed survivors, by Turkish officials who reported to their sultan, by Vlad himself in letters boasting of his body counts with chilling precision. What emerges is a portrait of a man shaped by childhood trauma, by years held hostage in the Ottoman Empire, by witnessing his father and brother murdered, by learning that in his world, survival required absolute ruthlessness, and that enemies must be eliminated, not merely defeated, but destroyed so completely that their memory became warning to others. But we will also separate fact from propaganda. The German pamphlets that spread his infamy were printed by his enemies. Numbers were inflated, atrocities elaborated, the character demonized for political purposes. Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary, fabricated letters accusing Vlad of treason to justify imprisoning him rather than supporting him against the Ottomans. The line between historical Vlad and legendary monster became blurred even in his own lifetime, yet beneath the propaganda lies undeniable truth. Vlad did impale thousands, He did massacre boyars at an Easter feast. He did lead a winter campaign that left over 23,000 dead. He did launch a midnight assassination attempt against the Sultan himself. These events happened. They were witnessed. They were recorded by multiple sources who had nothing to gain from invention. What do we do with a historical figure like this? How do we understand a man who is simultaneously a national hero in Romania, celebrated for resisting Ottoman conquest, and a byword for cruelty whose very name inspired the archetypal vampire? How do we visit the places where his violence unfolded, walk the halls of his castles, climb the steps to his fortresses, stand in ruins where prisoners work themselves to death building monuments to their own suffering? If you've visited these locations, if you've climbed to Poenari or walked the streets of Târgoviște, leave a comment telling us what you felt. Did the atmosphere carry weight beyond mere knowledge? Did the stones remember? Or were they simply ruins, their darkness supplied by imagination rather than by any lingering presence? If you value explorations into history that refuses sanitization, into places where medieval politics became medieval horror, into true stories that prove reality can exceed fiction in darkness, subscribe to this channel. We venture regularly into the past's most uncomfortable corners, where the line between hero and monster becomes dangerously thin. And as you watch tonight's journey through Vlad's life, ask yourself, what creates a man like this? Childhood trauma? Political necessity? Cultural context? Personal psychology? Or some combination that makes simple answers impossible? The historical record provides facts. Understanding those facts requires something more difficult than mere knowledge. It requires confronting what humans can become when power meets paranoia, when survival demands brutality, when the choice is between moral compromise and political extinction. I am Mr. Ravenhurst, and tonight we discover that the real Dracula was not undead. He was all too human, and that, perhaps, is the most disturbing truth of all. Let us begin in Transylvania, in a fortified town where a boy was born into a world where dragons and devils were not metaphors but family crests, where his father joined a crusading order that would give their bloodline a name that still echoes across 6 centuries, a name that means both dragon and devil in the Romanian tongue, a name that would become synonymous with horror. Chapter 1. Son of the Dragon, Son of the Devil. Sighișoara, 1431. The house still stands. Ochre yellow walls, narrow windows, stone foundation from the 13th century. You can visit it today, climb its medieval stairs, stand in the room where witnesses claim a second son was born to Vlad II Dracula in winter 1431, or perhaps 1428. The historical record offers frustrating uncertainty about the exact date. What we know is this: a boy named Vlad entered a world where survival required cunning, brutality, and the willingness to betray anyone, where princes were made and unmade through assassination, where loyalty was purchased rather than earned, where childhood ended not gradually but suddenly, violently, when political circumstance demanded it. The birth itself was unremarkable. Second sons rarely mattered in medieval succession. The firstborn, Mircea, would inherit. Young Vlad was spare, backup, insurance against misfortune. His destiny seemed to be minor nobility, perhaps military service, maybe church position, if his family's fortunes declined. Fate had other plans. To understand Vlad, we must first understand his father. Vlad II was born into blood rivalry, so intense it defined Wallachian politics for generations. 2 factions, the Draculești and the Danești, both branches of the House of Basarab, competed for the throne through methods that made Shakespeare's histories seem tame. This was not political debate. This was murder as statecraft. Whichever faction held power would hunt the other's members, impale them, bury them alive, eliminate any potential challengers with thoroughness that left no doubt about consequences of opposition. In 1431, Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund inducted Vlad II into the Order of the Dragon. This crusading brotherhood, dedicated to defending Christian Europe against Ottoman expansion, came with both prestige and a new surname, Dracul, from the Romanian word drac, meaning dragon. The Order's knights wore dragon emblems, representing martial prowess and sacred mission against Islamic conquest, but drac carried darker connotations. In the Romanian language, the word also meant devil, and the nobility, suspicious of Vlad II's political maneuvering, his willingness to ally with Ottomans when convenient, began using Dracul not as honor but as accusation. Devil, not dragon. His son inherited both meanings. Dracula, son of the dragon, defender of Christendom. Dracula, son of the devil, heir to damnation. Young Vlad spent his first 5 years in Sighișoara, a Saxon merchant town in Transylvania. The Saxons were German colonists who had built fortified cities throughout the region, controlling trade routes, dominating commerce, existing in constant tension with Hungarian nobility and Romanian princes. These tensions would later explode into violence that would make Vlad infamous. But in childhood, they were merely background noise to a boy learning the basics of noble life. Reading, writing, horsemanship, combat training, the education appropriate for a prince's son. In 1436, his father successfully claimed the Wallachian throne. The family moved to Târgoviște, the princely capital, where young Vlad would spend 6 years observing the machinery of power from inside the palace walls. What he learned there shaped everything that followed. Wallachia's position was impossible. To the north, the Kingdom of Hungary sought control, or at least influence over Wallachian policy. To the south and east, the Ottoman Empire demanded tribute, military support, ultimate submission. Wallachian princes survived by playing these powers against each other, by swearing fealty to whoever seemed stronger at any given moment, by switching sides when circumstances demanded. Betrayal was not character flaw, it was survival skill. Vlad II demonstrated this repeatedly. He had sworn loyalty to the Order of the Dragon, pledging to fight Ottomans. But when Ottoman power proved overwhelming, he also swore fealty to Sultan Murad II, paid tribute, promised military support for Ottoman campaigns. This satisfied no one. Hungarians saw him as unreliable. Ottomans suspected his true loyalties. Wallachian boyars saw opportunities to replace him with more pliable rulers. Young Vlad absorbed these lessons. Trust no one. Alliances are temporary. Power requires ruthlessness. Enemies must be eliminated completely, not merely defeated. But the lesson that would define his life came not from observation, but from experience. In 1442, when Vlad was 11 years old, Sultan Murad summoned his father to a diplomatic meeting at Gallipoli. It was a trap. Vlad II, recognizing the danger but having no choice, traveled to Gallipoli. He brought his 2 younger sons, 11-year-old Vlad and 7-year-old Radu, perhaps hoping their presence would demonstrate sincerity, perhaps intending to use them as diplomatic tools. The Sultan arrested all 3. After negotiations, Vlad II was released to return to Wallachia, but the boys remained. Hostages, insurance against their father's betrayal. Sent to the fortress of Erigöz in Anatolia, later moved to Adrianople, kept in Ottoman custody for years. How many years? 5 at minimum, possibly 6 or 7. Vlad's teenage years, from 11 to perhaps 17, spent as a prisoner of the empire his family had sworn to fight. What happened during those years remains partially mysterious. Ottoman records provide few details, but we can piece together fragments from various sources, creating a picture that explains much about the man Vlad would become. The brothers received education. The Ottomans recognized these hostage princes might eventually rule Wallachia, so they were trained in languages, military tactics, philosophy. Vlad learned fluent Turkish. He learned Ottoman warfare methods. He became an accomplished horseman and warrior, but the experience was traumatic. Some sources suggest periodic imprisonment, possible torture, certainly harsh discipline. Other sources claim Vlad witnessed impalements, learning the technique that would later become his signature. The psychological impact is visible in how differently the brothers responded. Radu adapted. He converted to Islam, became a favorite of the Sultan, would later be nicknamed Radu the Handsome for his striking appearance. When Vlad eventually became Prince of Wallachia, Radu would fight against his own brother, leading Ottoman forces, choosing the empire over family. Vlad resisted. He remained Orthodox Christian, refused assimilation, nursed grievances that would explode into spectacular violence. The experience taught him that survival required mastering enemies' methods, understanding their psychology, using their own tactics against them with even greater brutality. While Vlad was held hostage, events in Wallachia moved toward catastrophe. His father continued the dangerous balancing act between Hungarian and Ottoman interests. In 1447, John Hunyadi, who had become regent governor of Hungary and one of Europe's most powerful military commanders, decided Vlad II was too unreliable. The order was given. Vlad II was assassinated in the marshes near Baltani. Some sources say he was buried alive. Others describe torture first, prolonged suffering before death. His oldest son, Mircea, was captured. The reports of what happened next are consistent and horrifying. Mircea was tortured. His eyes were burned out with hot irons. Then he was buried alive, forced into a grave while still breathing. Earth piled on top while he screamed. Vlad, still held hostage hundreds of miles away, learned his father and brother had been murdered. Horribly. By Hungarian forces, who were supposed to be Christian allies against the Muslim Ottomans. The lesson was clear. There were no allies, only temporary arrangements maintained through violence or threat of violence. Trust meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant death. The Ottomans released Vlad shortly after, sending him back to Wallachia with military support to claim the throne. This was 1448. Vlad was perhaps 17. He had spent his formative teenage years in captivity. His father and brother had been murdered. His remaining brother had become an Ottoman convert. He was alone. His first reign lasted 2 months. John Hunyadi, the man who had killed his father, installed a rival from the Danish faction. Vlad was driven from power, forced into exile. For 8 years, he wandered, living with Ottomans, then fighting against them, seeking allies, finding temporary patrons, learning warfare, nurturing hatred, planning revenge. In 1456, opportunity arrived. John Hunyadi had died. His successor, Matthias Corvinus, needed allies on the Ottoman frontier. More importantly, the current Wallachian prince had proven difficult to control. Matthias provided Vlad with an army. In July 1456, Vlad invaded Wallachia and met the current prince, Vladislav II, in battle outside Târgoviște. Some accounts claim Vlad killed Vladislav personally, beheading him in single combat to ensure no resurrection of his rival's claim. Vlad III had reclaimed his throne. He was 25 years old. He had witnessed betrayal, captivity, torture, the murder of his family. He had learned that power required absolute ruthlessness, that enemies must be eliminated completely, that mercy was weakness, that fear was a weapon more effective than armies. What followed would earn him his nickname. The methods he would employ would shock even contemporaries accustomed to medieval brutality, and the first demonstration would come on Christianity's holiest day, when princes traditionally showed mercy and celebrated resurrection. Vlad planned the opposite. We leave Sigashora now, where the house still stands with its ochre walls and narrow windows. We travel south to Targovishte, to the palace where on Easter Sunday, the most sacred celebration in Orthodox Christianity, Vlad would invite the nobility to a feast and transform that feast into slaughter. Chapter 2. The Easter of Blood. Targovishte, Easter Sunday, 1457. The bells ring for morning services. Christ is risen. Hallelujah. The boyars of Wallachia arrive at the princely palace in their finest clothing, silk robes embroidered with gold thread, jeweled belts, fur-trimmed cloaks despite the spring warmth. This is Easter, the most important celebration in the Orthodox calendar, and appearance matters. Their wives wear elaborate headdresses, their children, scrubbed and dressed in miniature versions of adult finery, fidget in the chapel during the long liturgy. After services, the feast begins. Long tables fill the palace's great hall. Servants bring roasted meats, fresh bread, wine from the prince's cellars. The boyars relax. This is normal. This is tradition. Easter celebrations always brought nobility together for religious observance and royal hospitality. Vlad sits at the head table, watching. He has been prince for less than a year. In that year, he has moved carefully, consolidating power, making no sudden moves that might provoke opposition. The boyars believe they understand him, young, relatively inexperienced, dependent on their support and advice. They are wrong. Between courses, Vlad stands. The hall quiets. He has a question for his guests. How many princes have you seen during your lifetimes? The question seems innocent. Perhaps the young prince wants to hear stories, to learn from these men who have survived multiple regimes, who have outlasted 7 or 8 or more rulers. Some boyars answer proudly. They boast of their longevity, their ability to navigate Wallachia's dangerous politics, their survival through decades of turmoil. Others, sensing something wrong in the prince's tone, remain silent. Vlad smiles, but it is not a smile that reaches his eyes. You have seen many princes. You have served them, betrayed them, murdered them, replaced them. You have made Wallachia weak through your intrigues. You have killed my father. You murdered my brother. The hall freezes. Today, that ends. At Vlad's signal, armed guards enter from every doorway. Exits are blocked. The feast has become a trap. What happens next depends on whose account you read, but the core events are documented in multiple independent sources. A Romanian chronicle recorded 2 centuries later. Accounts by Greek historian Chalcondyles. German pamphlets printed within decades. The details vary. The central facts do not. The oldest boyars, those who had admitted to serving 7 or 8 princes, are seized first, dragged from the hall while their families watch. Outside the palace walls, stakes have been prepared. The impalement begins. The technique is specific, refined through practice. A wooden stake, carefully shaped. The end rounded, not pointed. This detail matters. A sharp point pierces organs quickly, causing rapid death. A rounded end can be forced through soft tissue without immediately rupturing major blood vessels, allowing the victim to survive for hours, sometimes days, in agony. The stake is inserted through the rectum, pushed upward through the torso, in many cases exiting through the shoulder or neck, sometimes positioned to emerge from the mouth. Ropes and horses force the stake through when resistance is encountered. Once fully impaled, the stake is raised vertically, planted in the ground. The victim's body weight causes them to slide slowly downward, driving the stake deeper. The process can continue for hours. The elderly boyars scream. Their families, still trapped in the hall, can hear them. The screams do not stop quickly. This is intentional. Vlad wants everyone to hear, wants everyone to understand what opposition brings. The younger boyars receive different treatment. They are arrested, along with their entire families, men, women, children, all chained together. They are still wearing their Easter finery when the march begins. 50 miles north to the Argesh River Valley, through mountainous terrain. No rest permitted, no changes of clothing. The silk robes and embroidered jackets, designed for ceremony, not labor, begin to tear within hours. The destination is Poenari, ruins of an old fortress perched on a cliff overlooking the river. Vlad has identified this location as strategically perfect, a mountain stronghold where he can retreat if enemies threaten the capital, a fortress nearly impossible to assault. But it needs reconstruction. Walls have collapsed, towers have fallen, years of neglect have reduced it to ruins. Vlad has just acquired his workforce. The boyars and their families are forced to carry stones, mix mortar, rebuild walls and towers. They work without proper food, without rest, without any change of clothing. Their Easter garments become rags, then fall away completely, leaving them naked. Many die. Exhaustion, starvation, accidents, or simply the psychological trauma of being reduced from nobility to slavery by their own prince. Contemporary sources claim most of the forced laborers perished during construction. One chronicle states they worked until their clothes were torn and they were left naked. Another mentions that the bodies of those who collapsed were simply incorporated into the fortress walls, buried in the foundations. Those who survived found themselves stripped of everything. Lands confiscated, titles revoked, political power destroyed. Vlad achieved multiple objectives with this single act. He eliminated a significant portion of the boyar class, particularly the older, more experienced nobles, who might coordinate resistance. He terrified survivors into absolute obedience. He acquired a fortress built with his enemies suffering, and he demonstrated that traditional protections, religious holidays, hospitality customs, nobility itself, meant nothing when they conflicted with his political goals. The Easter massacre was not merely revenge, though revenge was certainly part of the motivation. This was calculated statecraft. Vlad faced the same problem every Wallachian prince faced: how to maintain power when surrounded by ambitious nobles, foreign powers pressuring from all sides, rival claimants waiting for any sign of weakness. His solution was more brutal than most, but arguably more effective. After Easter 1457, no one in Wallachia challenged his authority directly. The psychological impact extended beyond those directly involved. The massacre occurred on Easter Sunday, the holiest day in Orthodox Christianity, a day when princes traditionally showed mercy, granted pardons, celebrated resurrection with generosity and forgiveness. Vlad chose this day deliberately. The violation of sacred tradition was part of the message. He recognized no restraints, acknowledged no boundaries that might limit his political freedom, moral considerations, religious obligations, traditions of hospitality. All were subordinate to the requirements of power. This willingness to violate the sacred appears repeatedly throughout his reign. When Turkish envoys visited and refused to remove their turbans in his presence, citing religious custom, Vlad had the turbans nailed to their heads with 3 spikes. The envoys bled slowly to death, their religious devotion transformed into instrument of execution. When German merchants from Transylvania violated his trade laws, he impaled them by the hundreds. Then dined among the dying, having his table set where he could watch their suffering while he ate. The Easter massacre established a pattern: exemplary violence, public spectacle of suffering, the transformation of execution into psychological warfare designed to terrorize future enemies into submission. Targovishte today preserves fragments of this history. The Chindia Tower still stands, exactly as it did in Vlad's time. rising above the modern city, offering views across the Wallachian plain. You can climb its narrow stairs, stand where Vlad stood, see what he saw. The ruins of the princely court have been excavated, partially restored. You can walk through the foundations of the great hall where the Easter feast occurred. Stand in the courtyard where stakes were erected for the elderly boyars. The city has embraced its dark heritage, somewhat uncomfortably. Vlad is celebrated as a strong ruler who defended Romanian independence. But the methods are acknowledged, not hidden. Tour guides explain the Easter massacre factually, noting both its brutality and its political effectiveness. The question of how to remember such a figure remains unresolved. Poenari Castle, the fortress built on boyar suffering, commands even more atmospheric power. To reach it requires climbing 1,480 concrete steps up the mountainside. A grueling ascent, taking 30 to 45 minutes for fit visitors. These modern steps replace the original rocky path that enslaved boyars climbed repeatedly while carrying stones, timber, supplies for reconstruction. The fortress itself is ruined. A landslide in 1888 carried portions of the northern wall into the Argeș River far below. Earthquakes in 1915, 1940, and 1977 caused additional damage. What remains are portions of walls, the bases of towers, enough structural evidence for archaeologists to reconstruct the original layout. But the location itself is extraordinary. Perched on a narrow ridge, surrounded by steep cliffs dropping hundreds of feet, overlooking the river valley below. This was medieval military strategy at its most effective. An army attempting to assault this fortress would have to climb a single narrow path, while defenders rained down arrows, stones, boiling liquid. The fortress could be held by a handful of defenders against hundreds of attackers. Vlad recognized this immediately. This was his personal refuge, his guarantee of survival if enemies came for him. And they did come in 1462, when Ottoman forces besieged the capital, and Vlad retreated to Poenari, escaping through a secret passage when even this fortress was threatened. Visitors to Poenari today report an atmosphere unlike other Romanian castles. Perhaps it's the grueling climb that leaves visitors exhausted, more susceptible to emotional impressions. Perhaps it's the isolation, far from major cities, surrounded by forest and mountain. Perhaps it's knowledge of the suffering that occurred during construction. Or perhaps some places do absorb the darkness of events that transpired there, not supernaturally, but through accumulated weight of human attention. The knowledge that multiple visitors bring with them, the stories told and retold until they become part of the stones. Whatever the explanation, Poenari feels different, heavier. Even on sunny days, with tourists taking photographs, there's an undercurrent of disquiet that defies easy explanation. The Easter massacre eliminated Vlad's domestic opposition, but it also established him as a ruler willing to employ methods that would shock even contemporaries accustomed to medieval brutality. This reputation would spread, and his next major act of violence would target not Wallachian boyars, but German-speaking Saxon civilians, whose crime was supporting his political rivals and violating his trade restrictions. What happened at Brașov would make the Easter massacre seem almost restrained by comparison. We leave Târgoviște now, where bells still ring for Easter services in churches built on ground soaked with blood. We travel north into Transylvania, to a prosperous Saxon city that had grown wealthy through trade with Wallachia, a city that was about to learn what happened when economic interest conflicted with Vlad's political goals, a city that would become another monument to his capacity for theatrical cruelty. Chapter 3. Where he dined among the dying. Brașov, April 1459. The woodcut still exists. Printed in Nuremberg in 1499, It shows a scene that contemporary witnesses swore they had witnessed. A table set with fine cloth and dishes, a prince dining calmly, and surrounding him, hundreds of bodies raised on stakes, some still moving, some already still, a forest of human suffering arranged in geometric patterns around his meal. This image, more than any other, defined Vlad's reputation across Europe. It was reproduced in countless pamphlets, distributed through German-speaking territories, creating a legend that would outlast the historical figure. The question historians debate is not whether the image is accurate in every detail. Obviously, it represents artistic interpretation. The question is whether the core event occurred. Did Vlad actually dine among the impaled? Multiple independent sources say yes. Brasov, known in German as Kronstadt, was one of Transylvania's most prosperous Saxon cities. Founded by Germanic colonists in the 12th century, it had grown into a major center of trade, connecting Hungarian markets with Wallachian resources. The Saxons who lived there were merchants, craftsmen, traders whose economic power rivaled Hungarian nobility. These were not Vlad's subjects. Brasov was part of Transylvania, which belonged to the Kingdom of Hungary. But the city's economic relationship with Wallachia made it politically significant, and that significance created conflict. Vlad wanted control over trade. He imposed restrictions requiring Wallachian merchants to sell goods at border markets, rather than allowing Saxons free access to his principality. This was economic nationalism, protectionism designed to prevent Saxon merchants from extracting wealth from Wallachia without proper taxation. The Saxons resisted. They had enjoyed profitable access to Wallachian markets for generations. They saw Vlad's restrictions as tyrannical. Some ignored the new rules, smuggling goods, bribing officials. More dangerously, the Saxons supported Vlad's rivals. When members of the Danish faction appeared in Transylvania, claiming the Wallachian throne and promising to restore favorable trade relations, the Saxons provided shelter, money, political backing. Brasov became a base for anti-Vlad conspiracies. This was intolerable. From Vlad's perspective, Saxon support for his rivals constituted an act of war. The fact that Saxons were not his subjects, that they lived in Hungarian territory, that attacking them would create diplomatic complications, none of this mattered. They were his enemies, therefore they must be punished. In April 1459, Vlad launched a military campaign into Transylvania. His target was Brasov and the surrounding Saxon villages. His objective was not conquest, it was terror. The Wallachian army descended on villages outside Brasov at dawn, burning homes, slaughtering livestock, killing anyone they found. Those who survived were captured, hundreds of them. Men, women, children, elderly, infirm. They were herded together and driven toward a hill outside Brasov, where Vlad had established his command position. There he ordered their impalement. The execution began systematically. Stakes had been prepared in advance. Executioners worked with practiced efficiency, having perfected their technique during the Easter massacre 2 years earlier. But at Brasov, Vlad introduced refinements. The bodies were arranged in patterns, concentric circles, geometric designs, creating visual spectacle designed to maximize psychological impact. This was not merely execution. This was art, horror transformed into aesthetic statement. Contemporary German sources claim 30,000 were impaled. This number is almost certainly exaggerated. Modern historians estimate the actual toll was probably in the hundreds or low thousands. Even at the lower estimate, this was a massacre of extraordinary brutality targeting civilians who posed no military threat. And when the killing was done, Vlad had a table brought, set with silk cloth, fine dishes, wine in silver cups, food prepared by his personal cooks. The table was positioned in the midst of the impaled. close enough that he could hear them, close enough to smell blood, close enough to watch them die. And there, he dined. Not quickly, not furtively, calmly, as if the screaming were music composed for his pleasure. One account describes a moment when a servant, overcome by the smell of blood and death, commented that the stench was unbearable. Vlad's response was to have the man impaled on a stake taller than the others, so he could breathe cleaner air above the smell. Then Vlad continued eating. The psychological motivation here demands examination. This was not merely sadism, though elements of sadism were certainly present. This was calculated theatre, political messaging through spectacle. Vlad was demonstrating several things simultaneously. First, that he was willing to violate any norm, any tradition, any expectation of princely behavior. Second, that proximity to suffering did not disturb him, that he had divorced himself from normal human empathy. Third, that opposition brought consequences so severe that death became preferable to the manner of dying. News of a prince who ate calmly while victims screamed around him would spread, would terrify, would make future enemies think carefully before crossing him. But the dining scene also reveals something darker about Vlad's psychology. He did not merely order cruelty from a distance. He witnessed it. He seemed to take satisfaction from proximity to suffering. This suggests either genuine sadism or such complete desensitization that the line between calculation and pleasure had blurred. The attack on Brasov created exactly the diplomatic crisis Vlad must have expected. The Saxons appealed to Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary, demanding protection and justice. Matthias, who had initially supported Vlad's claim to the Wallachian throne, found himself in an impossible position. The Saxons were his subjects. He was obligated to protect them, but he also needed Vlad as a buffer against Ottoman expansion. Matthias issued protests, demanded explanations, threatened consequences. Vlad responded by pointing out that Saxons had supported his enemies, had violated agreed trade terms, had conspired against Wallachia's legitimate prince. From his perspective, he had every right to punish traitors regardless of where they lived. The dispute simmered without resolution. Matthias lacked military strength to punish Vlad directly. The Saxons learned that supporting Vlad's rivals came with catastrophic risk. Vlad's position in Wallachia was strengthened, but the attack also contributed to his growing reputation for inhuman cruelty. The German pamphlets, printed on Gutenberg presses and distributed throughout Europe, portrayed him as monster. They combined factual accounts of events like Brasov with exaggerated or invented stories. One pamphlet claimed Vlad ordered women impaled together with their nursing infants on the same stake, forcing children into their mothers' severed breasts. Another described him cutting off women's breasts and forcing their husbands to eat them. A third claimed he roasted children and forced their mothers to consume them. How much of this was true? Some incidents probably happened in forms similar to what pamphlets described. War in the 15th century was brutal. Atrocities against civilians were routine. But the pamphlets also served propaganda purposes. They were printed by Saxon publishers who had every reason to demonize the prince who had massacred their countrymen. They were distributed in territories where Hungarian and German authorities wanted to discredit Vlad politically. What we can verify is that Vlad did impale large numbers, probably thousands throughout his reign. He did target civilians as well as combatants. He did use exemplary violence as political strategy. He did dine among dying victims at Brasov. The specific details of each incident may be uncertain, but the pattern is undeniable. Brasov today bears few physical traces of 1459. The city was rebuilt. Modern buildings cover medieval ruins. But the city's museums preserve the German pamphlets, displaying them as historical documents that reveal how Vlad's reputation spread across Europe. The hill outside Brasov, where the impalement allegedly occurred, is now suburban development. There is no memorial, no marker, nothing to indicate what occurred there. This absence itself is noteworthy. How do communities remember atrocities committed by figures simultaneously celebrated as national heroes? The answer, often, is complicated silence. But for Vlad, the Brashov massacre was merely preparation, a demonstration of methods he would employ on far larger scale. Because in 1462, Vlad would launch a winter campaign across the Danube into Ottoman Bulgaria that would leave over 23,000 dead, a campaign so brutal that Europe celebrated with masses of thanksgiving, while Ottoman chroniclers recorded it with horror, a campaign that would provoke Sultan Mehmed II to abandon all other military operations and focus entirely on destroying the Wallachian prince who had dared to slaughter Muslim civilians on such a scale. We leave Brashov now, where the museum displays woodcuts of a prince dining among the dying. We travel south to the Danube, to the borderlands between Christian Europe and the Ottoman Empire, to frozen rivers and burning villages. To a winter when Vlad would demonstrate that the horrors inflicted on boyars and Saxons were merely rehearsals for something far worse. Chapter 4. The Winter of 23,000. The Danube, Winter, 1461. The river freezes solid in January. Ice thick enough to support horses, thick enough to support an army. The Danube, which for most of the year separates Christian Europe from Ottoman territory, becomes a bridge in winter. Vlad understands this. He has been planning since autumn, gathering intelligence on Ottoman positions along the Bulgarian frontier, identifying targets, calculating how much devastation he can inflict before spring thaw makes retreat necessary. By 1461, Vlad has stopped paying tribute to Sultan Mehmed II. He has refused to provide troops for Ottoman campaigns. When Mehmed demands 1,000 young boys for the Janissary Corps, Vlad refuses flatly. More provocatively, he has been reaching out to European powers, proposing an anti-Ottoman alliance, contacting Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, sending letters to the Pope, positioning himself as crusader defending Christendom's frontier. He is preparing for war. Mehmed recognizes these preparations. In late 1461, the Sultan sends diplomatic envoys to Wallachia, ostensibly to negotiate, but actually to assess Vlad's intentions. The envoys arrive at Vlad's court. They refuse to remove their turbans in the prince's presence, citing religious custom that requires heads remain covered. Vlad's response is characteristically direct. He has the turbans nailed to their heads with 3 iron spikes. The envoys scream. Blood runs down their faces. They die slowly, their religious devotion transformed into instrument of execution. Their bodies are sent back to the Sultan. Mehmed's answer to this provocation is clear. Vlad must be removed from power and replaced with someone more compliant, preferably Radu, Vlad's younger brother who converted to Islam and remains at the Ottoman court. But before Mehmed can organize a full invasion, Vlad strikes first. In winter 1461 to 1462, when the Danube freezes, Vlad launches a preemptive campaign into Ottoman Bulgaria. His objectives are multiple: eliminate Ottoman military forces before they can be reinforced, destroy infrastructure that would support an invasion, kill anyone who might aid the Ottoman army, and, perhaps most cynically, provoke Ottoman retaliation on such a scale that European powers would be forced to intervene. If Vlad can position himself as indispensable to Christian defense, if he can make Wallachia the bulwark against Ottoman expansion, then he might receive the support needed to resist Mehmed's inevitable response. The campaign begins with Wallachian forces crossing the frozen Danube at multiple points. They move fast, striking before defenders can organize, hitting villages and towns, burning, killing, then disappearing before Ottoman reinforcements arrive. The scale of devastation is extraordinary. Vlad documents the results himself in a letter to Matthias Corvinus dated February 11th, 1462. This letter still exists in Hungarian archives. It provides Vlad's own account, and the details are chilling. "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived at Oblusica and Novoselo, where the Danube flows into the sea, up to Rahova, which is located near Chilia, from the lower Danube up to such places as Samovit and Gigen. We killed 23,884 Turks, without counting those whom we burned in homes, or the Turks whose heads were cut by our soldiers." 23,884. The specificity is remarkable. Either Vlad kept meticulous records, or he felt that precise numbers would be more credible than round estimates. Either way, he is boasting. He wants Matthias to know exactly what he has done, what he is capable of, what kind of ally Hungary is gaining. The letter makes clear these were not purely military casualties. Peasants, men and women, old and young. This was not army versus army. This was ethnic cleansing. The systematic elimination of Ottoman Muslims and anyone suspected of sympathizing with Ottoman rule. Some were killed in combat, others executed after capture. Still others burned alive in their homes, the doors barred from outside, whole families consumed by flames. The methods varied, but the goal was consistent: depopulation. Create a buffer zone of devastated territory that could not support an invading army. Impalement was used extensively. Prisoners were impaled and left along roads as warnings. Villages that resisted were sacked, their populations impaled in town squares. Bodies left unburied, displayed as psychological weapons. Other methods supplemented impalement. Burning alive, as Vlad's letter mentions. Beheading, heads collected and sent to Targoviste as trophies. Some simply killed by whatever means were convenient. This was not unprecedented strategy. Scorched earth tactics had been used throughout military history. What made Vlad's campaign distinctive was its scale, its deliberate targeting of civilians, and the systematic nature of the killing. European reaction to news was mixed. Pope Pius II, who had called for crusades against the Ottomans, praised Vlad's efforts. Churches throughout Christian Europe sang Te Deum masses, celebrating the victories. English pilgrims passing through Rhodes heard military knights praising Vlad's courage. Genoese merchants sent thanks, recognizing Vlad's campaign had distracted Ottoman forces. From European perspective, Vlad was a crusader, a Christian warrior defending Europe's frontiers. The fact that his methods involved mass murder of civilians was unfortunate, but acceptable in context of religious warfare. From Ottoman perspective, and from the perspective of Bulgarian Christians and Muslims who actually suffered through the campaign, Vlad was a genocidal monster whose army committed atrocities that violated any conception of honorable warfare. Both perspectives contain truth. When news reached Constantinople, Mehmed II abandoned all other military operations. The Sultan assembled an enormous army. Estimates range from 90,000 to 150,000 troops. This was the same military force that had conquered Constantinople a decade earlier. The most powerful army in the world at that time. Mehmed's objective was simple: invade Wallachia, capture or kill Vlad, install Radu as prince, ensure Wallachia would never threaten Ottoman interests again. The army began moving north in spring 1462, crossing the Danube into Wallachia with overwhelming force. Vlad could not match this in open battle. His entire military numbered perhaps 20 to 30,000. Against Mehmed's 150,000, direct confrontation meant annihilation. So Vlad chose guerrilla warfare. He retreated before the Ottoman advance, burning everything behind him. Wells poisoned, crops burned, livestock slaughtered or driven away. Anything that might provide food or water destroyed. This worked precisely because of the Ottoman army's size. 150,000 soldiers required enormous supplies. The longer they marched through devastated countryside finding nothing, the more their effectiveness degraded. Greek historian Doukas described the Ottomans' suffering. Thus, after having crossed the Danube and advanced for 7 days, Mehmed II found no man, nor any significant animal, and nothing to eat or drink. Turkish chronicler Tursun Beg added, "The front ranks reported there was not a drop of water. All the carts and animals came to a halt. The heat was so great you could cook kebabs on the mail shirts of the Ghazis." Vlad's forces conducted hit-and-run attacks on stragglers. Any soldier who wandered from the main column was killed. Any foraging party sent to find supplies was ambushed. The Ottomans could not move without losses, could not stop without starving, could not retreat without admitting defeat. But Vlad needed more than attrition. He needed a decisive blow that would force the Sultan to abandon the campaign entirely. So he planned the most audacious operation of his military career. A midnight assassination attempt on Mehmed himself. We move now from the devastated borderlands to Targoviste, where the Ottoman army approaches exhausted and demoralized. Where on the night of June 17th, 1462, Vlad would launch an attack so daring that military historians still study it as an example of asymmetric warfare at its most extreme. An attack that would nearly succeed in killing the Sultan. An attack that would be followed by a sight so horrific that even Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, would retreat in horror. Chapter 5. The night the Sultan nearly died. Targoviste, June 17th, 1462. Midnight approaches. The Ottoman camp covers square miles outside Targoviste. 100,000 soldiers, maybe more, arranged in orderly formations. Tents in neat rows. Cavalry on the flanks. Janissaries, the Sultan's elite guard, positioned at the center where Mehmed's tent stands. The camp is not sleeping. Guards patrol constantly. Fires burn throughout, providing light, making night attacks difficult. Mehmed has fought too many campaigns to be caught unprepared. But he does not know that Vlad is coming. Or more accurately, he knows Vlad will attempt something. The Wallachian prince has already demonstrated willingness to take extreme risks. The scorched earth campaign, the hit-and-run attacks on stragglers, the poisoned wells and burned crops. What Mehmed does not anticipate is that Vlad will personally lead a cavalry raid with one objective: kill the Sultan. The plan is suicidal. The Ottoman camp is massive, well defended, alert to danger. Penetrating to Mehmed's tent requires infiltrating past thousands of soldiers, navigating unfamiliar terrain in darkness, locating one specific tent among thousands. Even if they reach Mehmed, his Janissary guards will defend him to the death. The likelihood of success is minimal. The likelihood of dying in the attempt is near certain. Vlad chooses to lead personally. This decision reveals something essential about his character. He does not order subordinates into suicidal missions while remaining safe. He leads from the front, accepts the same risks he demands of his soldiers, demonstrates he will die before surrendering Wallachia. Preparation involves intelligence gathering. Captured Ottoman soldiers are tortured until they reveal camp layout, the location of Mehmed's tent, position of guards, timing of watch changes. Some sources claim Vlad disguised himself in Ottoman clothing, spoke Turkish fluently, used this to approach positions without being immediately recognized. Whether this is fact or romantic embellishment is uncertain, but it aligns with Vlad's tactical creativity. The attack force numbers between 7,000 and 10,000 cavalry, virtually Vlad's entire military strength. They leave Targoviste after dark, moving quietly toward the Ottoman camp. The night is moonless. Darkness provides cover, but makes navigation difficult. Vlad has ordered his men to carry torches, but these will only be lit once the attack begins. Until then, darkness is their ally. Approaching the camp, they split into multiple groups. This is psychological warfare as much as military strategy. Multiple simultaneous attacks from different directions will create confusion, making Ottomans uncertain about enemy numbers and objectives. Around midnight, they strike. Torches suddenly lit, transforming night into flickering chaos, charging into the camp screaming battle cries, killing anyone they encounter, setting tents ablaze, creating panic. The effect is devastating. Ottoman soldiers wake to fire and screaming, unsure where attacks are coming from, unable to distinguish friend from enemy in darkness. Ottoman units begin fighting each other, mistaking fellow soldiers for Wallachian attackers. Thousands of Ottomans may have been killed by friendly fire. Vlad's forces push deeper, searching for the Sultan's tent. Contemporary accounts differ on how close they came. Papal legate Nicolo Madrusa, who interviewed Wallachian veterans in Budapest afterward, recorded, "Making use of Turkish prisoners, at nightfall, Vlad penetrated into the Turkish camp with part of his troops, all the way up to the fortifications. And during the entire night, he sped like lightning in every direction and caused great slaughter." This suggests Vlad reached deep into Ottoman defenses, possibly getting close to Mehmed himself. But what saved the Sultan was his Janissary Guard. These elite troops maintained discipline when the rest of the camp descended into chaos. They formed defensive perimeters around Mehmed's tent, held positions despite fire and screaming, prevented Vlad's forces from penetrating to the Sultan. As dawn approached, Vlad recognized the assassination attempt had failed. Staying longer meant certain death as Ottoman forces regrouped in daylight. He ordered retreat. The Wallachian cavalry withdrew, fighting running battles as organized Ottoman units pursued. Casualty figures vary wildly. Turkish accounts minimize losses, claiming only a few thousand dead. Wallachian accounts claim 15,000 or more Ottomans killed. The truth is probably somewhere between, complicated by the fact that many deaths resulted from friendly fire. What matters more than numbers is psychological impact. The Ottoman army, which had marched confidently expecting easy victory, now recognized they faced an enemy willing to attempt the impossible. The Sultan himself had nearly been killed. Morale plummeted, but the night attack was only the beginning. What came next would force even Mehmed II to retreat in horror. As the Ottoman army regrouped and continued toward Targovishte, they encountered a sight that has become the defining image of Vlad's reign. The smell reaches them first. Copper, decay, death on a scale that overwhelms the senses. Then they see it. The forest. Not trees, stakes. 20,000 stakes rising from earth in geometric patterns, and on each stake, a body. Greek historian Leonikos Chalkokondyles recorded, "The Sultan's army entered into the area of impalements, which was 17 stades long and 7 stades wide. There were large stakes there on which, as it was said, about 20,000 men, women and children had been spitted, quite a sight for the Turks and the Sultan himself. 17 stades is approximately 3 kilometers, 7 stades roughly 1¼ kilometers, an area covering over 3 square kilometers, 20,000 bodies. This was not a battlefield. This was deliberate arrangement of prisoners executed specifically to create spectacle of terror. The bodies had been impaled days or weeks earlier. Many were decomposed. Birds nested in the corpses. The smell was overwhelming. But Vlad had arranged them carefully. The highest-ranking prisoners were placed on taller stakes, remaining visible above others. Hamza Pasha, the Ottoman commander Vlad had captured in an earlier ambush, was impaled on the tallest stake. Before impalement, he had been tortured, arms and legs cut off. His mutilated body sat atop the highest stake as message to Mehmed. This is what happens to those who serve the Sultan. Women and children were among the victims. Some accounts describe mothers impaled with infants attached to their bodies. Whether this detail is accurate or embellishment is uncertain. What is verified is that non-combatants were included. This was mass murder designed to traumatize. Chalker condyles recorded Mehmed's reaction. The Sultan was seized with amazement and said that it was not possible to deprive of his country a man who had done such great deeds, who had such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people. And he said that a man who had done such things was worth much. Even Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, a man whose own campaigns involved significant brutality, expressed something close to admiration for Vlad's ruthlessness. The use of diabolical is significant. Mehmed could have continued to Târgoviște. His army still outnumbered Vlad's forces 10-1. Victory remained militarily possible, but Mehmed retreated. The combination of the night attack and the forest of corpses convinced him that conquering Wallachia would cost more than it was worth. The Ottoman army withdrew, burning Brăila in retaliation before returning across the Danube. Mehmed left Vlad's brother Radu with a smaller force to continue the war, but the immediate crisis was over. Vlad had survived, but survival came at a price. His methods, while effective against external enemies, alienated potential allies. The boyars who had survived his purges waited for opportunities to betray him. Matthias Corvinus of Hungary grew suspicious of a ruler so willing to use extreme violence. By late 1462, Vlad's domestic support was crumbling. Radu, backed by Ottomans and supported by boyars who preferred anyone to Vlad, gained territory. In desperation, Vlad travelled to Transylvania seeking Hungarian support. Matthias Corvinus had him arrested. Vlad was taken to Visegrad fortress north of Budapest, where he would spend the next 12 years in captivity. His second reign, which began with such promise in 1456 and achieved such spectacular military success, ended with imprisonment by the very ally who should have supported him. The forest of impaled corpses became the defining image, the moment when his use of terror achieved maximum expression. It demonstrated both his military genius and his psychological darkness. But it also demonstrated something about the limits of terror as strategy. Vlad could frighten enemies into retreat. He could consolidate domestic power through exemplary violence. He could create a reputation so terrifying that merely invoking his name caused fear. But he could not create lasting alliances, could not inspire loyalty beyond fear, could not build institutions that would survive his personal rule. When Matthias imprisoned him, no one in Wallachia rose to demand his release. The boyars who had survived his purges welcomed his fall. The peasants who had benefited from his elimination of corrupt nobility did not rebel. Fear alone was not enough. We move now from Vlad's moment of greatest military success to his years of imprisonment, but we also move from verified historical events to territory where fact and legend become harder to separate. Because during Vlad's imprisonment, stories about his cruelty began circulating throughout Europe. Stories that would transform him from controversial military leader into mythological monster. Stories printed on Gutenberg presses, distributed through German cities, read by populations who would never visit Wallachia but would know the name Dracula as synonymous with inhuman cruelty. Stories that would ensure his legend outlasted his historical reality by centuries. Chapter 6. The Monster in the Tower. Visegrad Fortress, 1462 to 1475. The fortress rises above the Danube bend, grey stone against grey sky. Vlad lives here now, not in a dungeon but in comfortable rooms. This is house arrest for a prince, not imprisonment for a common criminal. He has servants, adequate food, freedom to move within the fortress walls, but he cannot leave. For 12 years, from late 1462 until his release in 1475, he remains here, while the world outside transforms him into legend. The German pamphlets begin circulating within years of his imprisonment, printed in Nuremberg, Lübeck, Strasbourg, distributed throughout German-speaking territories, purchased by literate populations hungry for stories of exotic horror from Eastern Europe. The pamphlets have titles like The Frightening and Truly Extraordinary Story of a Wicked Blood-Drinking Tyrant Called Prince Dracula. They combine factual accounts we've discussed, the Easter Massacre, Brasov Impalement, the Winter Campaign, with elaborated or invented atrocities designed to depict Vlad as inhuman. One pamphlet describes Vlad inviting all the beggars and disabled people in Wallachia to a great feast. Hundreds attend, expecting charity. After they've eaten and drunk their fill, Vlad asks if they wish to be free from suffering, free from their burdens. They answer yes. Vlad has the hall locked, set on fire. Everyone burns alive. The pamphlet presents this as Vlad's solution to poverty: eliminate the poor. Another story describes Vlad cutting open pregnant women to see their unborn children, examining the fetuses, tossing them aside, moving to the next victim. A third claims he nailed horses' shoes to ambassadors' feet when they refused to dismount in his presence, citing diplomatic protocol. How much of this is true? Some stories may contain kernels of truth elaborated beyond recognition. The feast that ended in fire might reference some actual event distorted through retelling. The pregnant women might be exaggeration of atrocities that did occur during his campaigns. Others are likely complete fabrication, consistent with medieval horror literature's conventions, designed to depict Vlad as monster rather than merely brutal ruler. The most famous image appears in a woodcut from 1499. Vlad dining among the impaled. Bodies arranged in neat rows while the prince calmly eats. This probably references the actual event at Brasov, but the artistic depiction is clearly stylized for maximum emotional impact. The pamphlets serve multiple purposes. For Saxon merchants whose communities Vlad attacked, their revenge, damaging his reputation permanently. For Matthias Corvinus, their justification, explaining why he imprisoned rather than supported the Wallachian prince. For printing houses, they're profitable. Stories of extreme cruelty sell well. The pamphlets establish narrative patterns that persist for centuries. Vlad as sadist, Vlad as tyrant, Vlad as monster who transcended normal human psychology. These characterizations are exaggerated, but they're built on foundation of truth. While imprisoned at Visegrad, Vlad reportedly demonstrates behaviors that support the cruelty narrative. According to Gabriele Rangoni, Bishop of Eger, who visits the prison, guards observe Vlad catching rats and birds, then impaling them on small sticks or cutting them into pieces. Rangoni interprets this as evidence Vlad cannot forget his wickedness, that even in captivity he compulsively reenacts his preferred execution method. This anecdote, if true, is psychologically revealing. It suggests either mental disturbance, behavioral compulsion indicating psychological damage, or possibly therapeutic activity, a way to process trauma through repetitive action, or perhaps simply how Vlad passes time, treating animal torture as entertainment in an era when sensitivity to animal suffering was non-existent. The anecdote also serves propaganda purposes. Rangoni is making a case for continued imprisonment, arguing Vlad's cruelty is intrinsic rather than situational. Despite his reputation, Vlad gradually works his way back into Matthias's favor. Several factors contribute. Radu dies in the early 1470s. The current Wallachian prince proves problematic for Hungarian interests. Vlad converts to Catholicism from Orthodox Christianity, demonstrating willingness to align with Hungarian religious culture. He marries Matthias's cousin, creating family connections. By 1475, circumstances align for release. Stephen III of Moldavia, fighting Ottomans on his own frontier, requests Matthias release Vlad. The logic is strategic. An experienced anti-Ottoman commander could help defend Christian territories. Matthias agrees. Vlad is released and given command of forces fighting Ottomans in Bosnia. In early 1476, he leads campaigns capturing Srebrenica, Šabac, other fortified positions. Reports from this campaign indicate Vlad employs his characteristic methods: mass impalement, civilian massacres, the terror tactics that worked in Wallachia applied in Bosnia. But Vlad's objective is not Bosnia. He wants to reclaim the Wallachian throne. With Hungarian and Moldavian support, he invades in November 1476. Basarab the Elder flees. Vlad is crowned prince for the third time. His final reign begins in late November. It lasts approximately 1 month. In late December 1476 or early January 1477, Vlad is killed in battle. The exact circumstances remain disputed. Most sources agree he was fighting Ottoman forces and Basarab, who had returned with Turkish support. But specific details vary. Some accounts claim ambush by large Ottoman force. Others suggest assassination by boyars. Still others describe treachery by soldiers in his own army, who switched sides during battle. What is verified is that Vlad died violently, probably in battle, somewhere between Bucharest and Giurgiu. His body was reportedly decapitated. The head sent to Constantinople, where Sultan Mehmed had it preserved in honey and displayed on a stake above the city gates. This was the Sultan's revenge, executed years after the humiliation of 1462. The man who impaled thousands reduced to trophy. The location of Vlad's body, if recovered at all, is uncertain. Romanian tradition claims he was buried at Snagov Monastery, an island monastery in a lake north of Bucharest. This monastery has long been associated with Vlad, though whether he was actually buried there is debated. Excavations in the 1930s claimed to find a grave consistent with someone of Vlad's status, but the evidence was inconclusive. Recent theories even suggest burial in Naples, Italy, though this is highly speculative. The uncertainty surrounding Vlad's burial is fitting. His life was spent navigating uncertainty, switching allegiances, surviving through cunning and violence. That his final resting place remains uncertain mirrors the ambiguity that defined his existence. Vlad's third reign ended as abruptly as it began. 1 month was not enough time to re-establish control, to consolidate power, to determine whether his methods would still work. He died before answering these questions. His death at approximately 45 years old ended a life defined by violence. From childhood captivity through multiple reigns as prince, Vlad's existence was shaped by constant conflict. He killed thousands, transformed execution into theatre, used suffering as strategic weapon, but he also defended Wallachia's independence against overwhelming Ottoman power, eliminated corrupt nobility, promoted based on merit rather than birth. This dual nature makes Vlad impossible to categorize simply. The pamphlets that circulated during and after imprisonment created legend that overshadowed historical figure. By late 15th century, Dracula meant cruelty throughout German-speaking Europe. But the pamphlets also preserved his memory. Without them, Vlad would be minor regional prince, known only to specialists. Because they transformed him into legendary villain, his story survived. Was eventually encountered by an Irish writer named Bram Stoker, who would use the name for his archetypal vampire. The connection between historical Vlad and Stoker's vampire is tenuous. Stoker's notes mention Dracula as a name, but show little evidence of detailed knowledge about Vlad's actual life. Yet the connection persists in popular imagination. Dracula now refers primarily to Stoker's vampire, but awareness of historical Vlad has grown. tourism in Romania exploits the connection. Despite historians' insistence, Vlad never visited most places marketed as Dracula's castle. The real locations associated with Vlad offer more authentic engagement. Poenari Fortress with its 1480 steps, Targovište with its Chindia Tower, Snagov Monastery. These places provide connection to history that commercialized vampire tourism cannot match. The question we're left with is, how do we remember such a figure? He committed acts that today would be crimes against humanity, ordered mass murder, employed torture as state policy, used exemplary violence to terrorize populations, but he also defended his principality against overwhelming odds, resisted Ottoman expansion when most of Europe was unwilling to fight, became a symbol of resistance that Romanians still reference. There is no simple resolution to this contradiction. Modern Romania has not fully resolved this tension. Vlad appears in textbooks as a strong ruler who defended sovereignty. His methods are acknowledged, but often contextualized as typical of the era or necessary given circumstances. International perception, influenced by Bram Stoker and countless vampire films, views Vlad primarily as inspiration for Dracula. This fictional association overshadows historical reality. What matters is that we've examined verified record, separated documented events from propaganda and legend, acknowledged that Vlad did impale thousands, did massacre boyars, did conduct ethnic cleansing, did employ terror deliberately. We've also acknowledged that numbers in pamphlets were often exaggerated, that some atrocities may be inventions, that propaganda shaped perceptions. What emerges is a portrait of a man shaped by trauma, who learned brutality from captors, who discovered extreme violence could be an effective political tool, who employed that violence so skillfully his name became legendary. Whether that legend deserves condemnation or admiration remains unresolved. Conclusion: where history became horror. The stakes have crumbled into dust. The bodies they bore have long since decomposed. The principality Vlad defended eventually merged with Moldavia to form modern Romania. The Ottoman Empire he resisted no longer exists. Sultan Mehmed, who displayed his head, is 6 centuries dead. But Vlad endures. In history books and tourist brochures, in scholarly debates and vampire films, in collective memory of a world simultaneously condemning and fascinated by extreme violence, he endures as warning of what humans can become, as example of how terror can be weaponized, as illustration that effective rulership can coexist with monstrous cruelty. The mountains of Romania remember. The stones of Poenari and Targoviște remember. The Danube borderlands remember. And 6 centuries later, we remember too. Drawn to darkness, seeking to understand what created a man like this, what allowed a prince to order such horror, what transformed a childhood captive into a ruler who made an empire retreat through sheer force of terror. Tonight, we walked in Vlad's footsteps. We climbed his fortresses, stood in his capital, examined documented evidence, separated verified history from propaganda and myth. We confronted uncomfortable truth that the real Dracula committed horrors no fictional vampire could surpass. And we're left with questions that have no easy answers. How do we remember such figures? How do we balance acknowledgement of military genius against condemnation of genocidal methods? How do we visit places where thousands died and determine what their deaths meant? Perhaps the only honest answer is that we remember complexly. We acknowledge both what Vlad achieved and how he achieved it. Recognize both military effectiveness and moral horror. Admit that history rarely provides villains purely evil or heroes purely good. We confront uncomfortable reality that the past is filled with figures like Vlad, people simultaneously admirable and monstrous, whose legacies resist simple categorization. The forests where he hunted have changed. The castle where he was born houses restaurants and museums. The fortress he rebuilt has collapsed into ruins. The capital where he ruled is now a provincial city. Time transforms everything, making even horror quaint, turning terror into tourist attraction, but the names remain. Vlad, Dracula, Tsepesh, the Impaler, names that still carry weight, that still evoke fascination and revulsion, that still remind us what humans are capable of when survival demands brutality, when power enables cruelty, when psychological damage meets political opportunity. 6 centuries separate us from the night Mehmed's army encountered 20,000 impaled corpses outside Turgoviste. Enough time that horror has faded into history, that we can examine events analytically, debate strategy and effectiveness without confronting immediate physical reality, but not enough time that questions have been answered, not enough time that we've determined what Vlad's legacy means, not enough time that we've resolved how to remember a figure simultaneously celebrated and condemned. The places wait, Poenari on its mountain, Targoviste with its tower, Sigishwara with its Saxon walls. They wait for visitors seeking connection to history, seeking to understand how a prince, born into nobility, became synonymous with cruelty, seeking to walk where Vlad walked and stand where his victims died. They wait patient as stones, silent as graves, ready to share what fragments of truth they still preserve, ready to remind us that history is not distant academic abstraction, but lived experience of real people in real places who suffered and died and left traces that 6 centuries cannot entirely erase. And on quiet nights, when mist rises from the Argesh Valley and wraps around Poenari's ruined towers, when shadows deepen in Targoviste's ancient courtyards, when wind howls through Carpathian passes where Vlad's armies marched, perhaps the stones remember more than we know. Perhaps places do absorb suffering, do retain imprint of horror that occurred there. Or perhaps darkness is simpler. Perhaps it's merely what we carry with us, the knowledge of what happened, the awareness that humans created this suffering, that no supernatural force was required, that the real Dracula needed no vampiric powers to inspire terror that would last 600 years. I am Mr. Ravenhurst. The stones of Romania remember. The question is, will you?